So, short bio. So, my favorite name for myself, because this has been a problem ever since I first started doing anything, is lately I'm a resilience geek, is what I really am. I just cannot get enough of it. I want to talk about it all the time. I wake up and think about it in the middle of the night. I write about it. Everything goes through that filter. And as a result, there are anything that's related to that, which everything's related to, it becomes something that interests me by nature of how does it feed the way humans are? How does it feed the way that humans are buoyant? How are the ways that we get in the way of ourselves? How are the ways that we socially get in the way of our own or somebody else's resilience or capacity to be with what is, right? And so, and resilience is the closest word I can come to that. At the same time, the other things that are key, that keep coming back around to, are these questions of what is the nature of self-compassion, curiosity, what are the ways that we speak to each other and speak to ourselves. And so my official background goes in the directions of language, and I have a master's in international studies in diplomacy, and I teach up at Montana State University in the Human Leadership Development Program. And I teach what is it to be a resilient leader, right? So a lot of young students or actual leaders are like, okay, here I am. I either want to be a leader, or I accidentally stumbled into being a leader, or people treat me like one and I don't know why. But how do you take that role, that being, and design for someone who can be well through time, who can be committed to being there for what matters to you now and 5 years from now, until you're ready to let that go and do something else? You need to be well. And so I was a survivor of a climbing accident when I was 16, and 9 people died. And it was a school climb. And so I was introduced to the principles of functional resilience at a very young age, like survival resilience. Like, how do I climb out of a dark pit and get okay? And because I was in such a large community, and because of geek brain, it got to be also a really more open question about how do humans do this, right? Not just me. And there must be humans who are really good at this, and what are they doing, and how could I learn from them? And I could watch this whole community that was suffering and notice, like, this thing that this person did, or this way this person has of coping or being with this whole thing, that's going to serve them really well, or that's not, or that's good for now, but that could have consequences later. And then started collecting a toolbox of, that helped, that worked, that was useful, right? So, and when I normally am framing what I do, that very often has been a starting point in the conversation, right? That happened, and therefore I got curious and interested, and it was important to me, and now I work with all of that stuff. So where I'm going to take you today is I'm going to broaden that story, go back a little bit further, and bring you right up to us now coming out of a pandemic, right? And I am going to say that I got COVID in January of last year, and was sick for 2 months straight in bed. And that in the process of that happening, that I understood that I had been in training for that for decades now. Like, that was my moment. Like, everything that met that virus was in part what I have been in training for even longer, even before Mount Hood. So I want to read you how I know this. This is a letter that I wrote to a friend. It was a birthday letter to a friend. I think I wrote it, based on the math at the very end, I'm pretty sure I wrote it maybe 20 years ago, is when I wrote this letter. Dearest, and this was someone who was at the school with me, so very old, very dear friend. Dearest, I mildly remember Watergate, and when someone gifted Ronald Reagan with a white Arabian stallion. I was furious. I was 6, probably. The explosions of the Challenger and of Mount St. Helens. And most formative, the Iranian hostage crisis, during which men kept each other sane in captivity by sharing poems, science lessons, teaching each other their languages, when freedom, control, safety, and all possessions were in the hands of hostile others. This is why and when I started learning languages, sketching, collecting stories, experiences, conversions, conversations in countries, coincidences, homes, silences, discoveries, skills, tricks, games, jokes, recipes, smells, flash fiction, pain management, serenity. If and when I am imprisoned and stripped of all else, I will have something to give, and we will all stay sane that much longer. In the meantime, all these things ring in as useful. Grace and resource through stresses always lighter than such a prison. And I have quite the collection already, enough never to be decently bored or quite alone. There is much more still out there to collect during my days not in prison. More than double my days on this planet thus far. And we are only here for a while. We are all only anywhere for a while. Love, Lorca. I had what I think of as probably one of the better versions of COVID that you could get. And what it was undiagnosed at the time because it was so early and I had no fever. And so they said, well, there's a virus going around. We think you have this virus plus bronchitis. And, but you have no fever, so just go home and let us know if anything changes. So I went home and I was mostly exhausted. I couldn't move very much, and I hurt. I had muscle pain, and there were plenty of days when nothing happened but that. I just was very happy to be just in bed and do nothing at all, not even read or anything. But there were a lot of other days where my brain was on fire, and where new things were rising up, and old ideas and some of my old diagrams that I've taken and understandings of how things relate to each other that feed resilience or that sap resilience, all just, it was like having these like crystals that, sprung up in the air in front of me and just spun in the light, and I just watched all of the pieces, right? And like, oh, now I get it, and now I get it. So, I mean, that's a thinker's dream, right? To have that level of innovation just occurring in part because you slowed the hell down, because you sat still long enough for something to catch up to you, right? This pandemic has been for so many people a forced invitation to contemplation, an invitation to be alone, an invitation to silence and solitude and stillness. And when I teach up at MSU, or when I teach one of my more in-depth trips down resilience wildernesses, metaphorically speaking. When I take people on these things, I dedicate a chunk of time to silence, solitude, and stillness. And up on campus, the week during which I do that is the most terrifying week that we have. It completely is not something that we are inviting ourselves to visit these things very often. And so that happened, right? That happened to millions and millions of humans. And some of the changes that are arising in the sea change are the ones that I think a lot of people are focusing on, the changes that have been imposed, right? You have to do this, and you have to do this, and we have to do this in order for everybody to be safe. And now we're going to do this, and this is what's getting put into place. Some of this might get taken apart later, but some of it's in for good, right? But what fascinates me right now is what is going to arise, what is already arising as a result of these experiences of self, right? And part of the results of that is going to be more chaos initially, right? And we're seeing some of that, right? And some of those conversations sound like, I'm not going back to work. I'm not going back to work for you. I'm not going to work for that amount of money. I'm not staying married to you. I am not, I'm not going to put up with these things anymore. I won't be spoken to that way. All right? These conversations are showing up. And some of them are not going to, some of them are still internal conversations, right? Some people are like, well, let's see how things fall out. And then a large part of the human brain also says, oh, that's scary. Let's go back to what we were doing before. And your ego says, I gotcha. I'll put up barriers again, and I'll protect you. And yet, people got a taste of the wilderness. And part of my job now, part of the way I feel my work in the world right now, is to feed and encourage that kind of courage in a safe way. I think probably the best analogy for how I experience my work right now is going back to being a wilderness guide into people's own selves, right? For people, as people start to recognize that, okay, this isn't quite the known territory that I thought it was. I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought I knew what mattered to me. I was wrong, or that has changed. And how do we have conversations that are not then destructive, withdrawing, running away, lashing out, making more rules, right? But that are curious, that are compassionate, that are adventuresome, and that are done in the way that a skilled guide would take you into the wilderness, by saying, I'm going to give you new tools, I'm going to be with you, right? And I'm going to bring you home safe, and you will come back changed. Right? This is my work now. And having been a rabid collector of anything that feeds me, that interests me, that's worthy of sharing with other people in case I got put in prison, right? Prison can look like a lot of things. We can be in prison in our own bodies. I could have been paralyzed and used those things, right? I can teach these tools now to someone who is still in quarantine and will be. This is wilderness travel for everybody, for anybody, right? As long as they are feeling that pull towards some adventure, right? Some newness. Like, I'm different, I need something on the outside that reflects that difference, that change, right? And that pull towards risk too, because we've all been kept very safe. So part of that work is external, right? it shows up in those conversations of, I resign. You need to move out now. Or I want to start playing the fiddle again. I'm going to go find a teacher, right? Or I don't like living in a place that doesn't have light, right? I'm going to go find another place to live that has light, even if it's smaller or whatever. And so that's kind of our default way of thinking, in that I'm going to go change circumstances, right? And which is good. I mean, it can be very good. But if we stop there, we lose all the ice under the iceberg, right? That's the proportions that we're looking at in terms of where we have the capacity to invite change. And so this year for me has been partly a process of looking at what I teach and how I teach, because all of a sudden it was transferred from putting together programs with organizations or within a university, or to, hey, it's me and a computer and people in Bali and Switzerland and, Butte. And looking at, one, how would I love to teach, right? How would that be? What would I love to add in? And so far I'm not running into anything that says I can't add these other things in. So, but also starting to allow myself in some ways to teach the riskier stuff, okay? And I have been on a progression for a long time of developing this experience of immersing myself in a thing, right? In this quality that almost can't be named, but is identifiable, and that I know it, and I know when I'm not in it, and I can come back to it and come back to it. And so I find myself in new places with new depth and new understanding and new ahas. And then there's new games that show up at that point. And then I have new levels of courage, which I can then take on something else. And I want to take people with me. And I want to scare people in a really good way, right? In the way that when you take someone rappelling, right? And they're like, I don't like this, I'm not happy. And then, 20 minutes later, they're like, I can't believe it. Like, that's amazing. Like, I am it. Like, I am amazing. And when I work with a new group, very often I do find myself needing to return to the basics. If I discover oh, wait a minute, hold on, we're missing a piece of foundation. So we'll go back and we'll do that, because that's really what's needed, and that's why I'm here. Being alone for a year, in some ways, it let me develop that whole trip plan. Because I was like, why not? I have time. And it also let me develop the courage to say, I can take people with me and keep them safe, right? I'm not throwing people to the wolves, even if sometimes it feels like it. Like telling them, inviting them to experience silence, solitude, and stillness, right? In any meaningful way, right? And I love these moments so much that I start to feel vaguely evil, right? I mean, it's this kind of weird evil glee. And it, it could show up with someone when I say, I would find a student who is unbelievably uncomfortable with compliments, right? And so we just take some space with that first, right? Creating some space around it, creating an understanding of why that might arise, humanizing it for her and for the rest of the class, and then giving her a framework in which I have someone tell her a sincere compliment, someone who knows her, someone who acknowledges something that's really real, right? Who says, I always just enjoy so much how present you are when you talk with me, right? And her invitation is to take 15 seconds and just stay with it. Don't say anything, don't do anything. Just stay. Keep breathing. And at the end of 15 seconds, her job is to say, thank you. And that's it. And this is almost like a traumatizing experience if it's not done carefully, right? But at the end of it, she has experienced discomfort that is difficult yet tolerable. And the way that we understand neuroscience now, we can know that after 15 seconds, her brain has rearranged itself, that it will be easier for her next time. The 15-second rule is there because neuroscience says that's how long it takes for you to start rearranging your brain's progressions. It's like doing reps. Okay? So I'm tired of playing it safe, as I have been all of the time, right? And there's been some years where it felt like I've been keep circling back around. This year, one of the extraordinary things that happened in January was I went out to do a training in Seattle, stayed with my brother, who's a naval architect, and at one point he opened up a book, a textbook, and said, hey, this is a naval design spiral. This is the tool that you can use in a simplified form. This is the tool that you can use if someone says, I want you to design me a new battleship that includes a whole lot of interlocking systems that has to support hundreds and hundreds of people, and you can't build a model. There's no scale model for a battleship, right? How do you arrange your understanding of all of these choices that have to be moving forward on all fronts, right? You can't do all of it independently, like, okay, first we're gonna arrange this, and then we'll do this, and when that's all settled, then we'll move on to, to the hull. And then when the hull is completely settled, then we'll move on to the different navigation systems. But by the time you've done all of that, you have to change the hull, right? So how do you design for that? And I looked at this image of a naval design spiral, and I said, as I always do, that's resilience. And I came home, lay flat on my back for 2 months, and this naval design spiral turned into a resilience design spiral, which is the map for the wilderness experience. And are we okay for time?
It's like 6:45.
Okay, I'm gonna just show you a very rough version of it. Because so that you can start to see what it, yeah, I'm not just gonna leave you hanging. All right, so the way a naval design spiral works is you start with, what are the needs of the client? The US Navy, whatever. They're like, we need something that can go from here to here without refueling. We need to have this armament and these number of humans, and it has to go this fast, and it's got to be really cool looking so that it goes through Congress. Sorry. So anyway, you start with the client needs, okay? And then the next thing you go to is something really big. And in the design spiral, it's the naval, it's the hull. Like, do we want a single hull? Do we want a double hull? Does it need to be really good in rough water? And then they just start working their way around, okay? And so here you would have the hull, right? And you go into the navigation systems, and you go into the food systems, and you go into the fuel systems, and you go, and you just address all of these different issues with the available information and the available technology, and you work your way around. And then you come back and you're like, okay, now we know a lot more than we knew before. So let's revisit our needs, right? You're like, based on your original needs, we have found that this is what's possible. This is not as possible, but we also can evolve something over here. So this is where we're at now. Let's talk about what you really want from here. You're like, okay, let's go talk about the hull again. Okay? So this is where my brain exploded. And this is a resilience design spiral, all right? And my question was, what are the points where everybody has to visit in such a way that by the time they visited these things, by the time we come back to this first thing, they're a different person. And yet the same, but deeper, lighter, they know themselves better, there's more ease. Yeah, right? Who wouldn't want to lie in bed for 2 months with that?
No, that's what we do. I mean, like I never thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, actually, this is very convenient because I have it right here. So the first thing that I have on here, and I'm mostly not going to go into these, although I'm totally open to conversation for the rest of my life about these things. But the first thing that I use is the tarn. And so the tarn is an analogy. It's a way of mapping resilience based on me saying, you are a mountain lake. You are an ecology. The whole system that you are right now is a functioning, complex, beautiful system that is being fed by water sources. It's feeding water sources out. It's your energy, your life energy, your resilience that you're gathering in to a shape, and then you're feeding it out. And as long as that's happening in a measured way that's not out of balance, then it invites life. It creates life all around it. It creates this amazing, and so you are life. When we are healthy, everything around us gets a little bit more life, right? Our kids, our work, our gardens, everything is just lifted, right? So I've been teaching what a tarn is, what it looks like, how it feels to be a healthy, gorgeous ecosystem, how to feed that ecosystem in yourself, how to understand where it goes off balance, right? And then take steps. But I keep teaching that over and over and over again because it's needed. And I was like, but there's stuff. So now I actually have a map where I'm like, so guess what? It's a continent, right? Or like, this is the solar system, but guess what? There's a galaxy. Does anyone want to come play? So the second thing is one of the most fundamental because it just is. The second one, and I got into a random conversation on the road this afternoon with a very attractive former naval officer, older man. And we got into this big conversation about compassion, self-compassion clears the way for actual anything that matters, connection, because how much time gets wasted with negative self-talk, right? And energy. So compassion's the second one, for yourself, for everyone around you. Not as I have to be nice all the time, as to clear away all of that stuff so that you can actually be with what's real. I'm always renaming these too. So, but this one, I'm just going to call it for the moment mammal. You could also call it embodiment. We are embodied spirits. We are all of this. And it is very easy in our culture to become just above the neck. So re-inviting as much as is necessary, the relationship, bringing everything below the neck back to the table as part of the conversation for any choices, any decisions that happen. The next one, wild. It's the wilderness. It's being with the fact that we are not in control, that we have the perceptions of being in control, that we think we are, that there are minimal things that we can take action in. In fact, there are multiple, infinite things we can take action in, and that we are not in control. And the extent to which that you are resisting that, you are not resilient. So that's another conversation. The next one is, I think it's blind spots, which is a good one right after here, actually, because that's where I think it's worth its own section, actually, enough. Because blind spots are where we often occur right where we are unwilling to admit this stuff, right? You're like, okay, all right, so this is the world, right? And then we take action from there, which is really dangerous, right? And where it gets even more dangerous is this next section, which is leadership, okay? Because the hallmark of a leader who has large blind spots is someone who is constantly looking for blaming, who needs credit for everything, who is very attached to the way things have always been, is emotionally fragile. These are natural consequences of blind spots. So moving from here to looking at who are we here? Where do I stand on this right now? Do I want to be a leader at all? Am I a leader regardless of whether I want to be? And what is the moral responsibility that I hold as a leader? Okay? And you could be a leader because people work for you. You can be a leader because people think of you when they think of something else and they look to think about how you do things. Done. You're a leader, right? So how do you own that and stay sane and stay upright and make choices that are going to affect everybody? Because if you're an ecosystem, everything you are and everything you do is affecting everything around you. Okay? I think I have one too many here. Doesn't matter. I'll work. Thanks. I'm gonna have to work backwards here. Okay. So, I don't think there's anything. By the time you get here, you're about ready to have someone tell you that time isn't what you think it is. And that chances are that you have been holding it with a tighter grip than you need to. That it is based on physics, a looser thing, and based on resilience, you can start to work with the looseness that it exists in reality around time to your advantage. And again, adding lightness, adding grace. And it's just really fun because it starts to mess up your world, which is tied to this. And then the long project, which is what everybody, it's a 2-year project that will keep you in a sling as you are going through all of this. Now, once you're gone through all of this, then we get back and you can remap yourself as a resilient human and say, whoa, I'm a little different than I was before, right? And then we move on to compassion. And you're like, I see compassion, I'm more compassionate now. And the interesting thing about the way this works is that you're just living from more compassion, but not because you stayed here the whole time. This feeds compassion, it all feeds. So the other part of this spiral looks like this. I'm not going to do all of these, but you get the gist. These are all connected. There is not one of these that does not have implications for how you experience all of the others. And therefore, every time you move forward in one, you have shifted and moved forward in all of them. And so we visit compassion, and then we go back into our bodies and feel how we feel our bodies differently. And then we experience differently what's out of control because we're less afraid and we're less tense. And so we're more relaxed. And then we're like, oh, there's a whole blind spot I didn't even see last time. So you come into here and you're like, leadership, I can actually see other humans differently than I saw before. Okay, this is new. Like I didn't even quite, because probably before you had some more armor up for yourself to protect yourself. And now that that's down, you have less vanity, more ease, more humility, It's really great in here, right? So you're like, oh, gosh, this even feels better. Like I could go here. And you're like, oh, I didn't get some of that time thing before, but whoa, it just got looser too. And now my project has developed, right? So this is a multidisciplinary project that when you start it, you would not be able to, you don't have the skills needed to complete it. And then we revisit here. Sorry, this is actually a very messy drawing. I have other cleaner drawings, but what happens that's interesting to me, is what I've found over the years of doing this, is that you're like, okay, so now we're on the third level in, right? So we're like, here's a dot, here's a dot, here's the third dot. Okay? And so you have these lines where we're like, hey, compassion goes all the way in, deterrent goes all the way in. All these things go all the way in. But the dots stop at some point. At some point, it stops showing up experientially as revisiting all these things, and it just starts to get experienced like this, because they're all the same thing, fundamentally, right? At that place, there is less and less experience of how these things are different. It's just life. This extraordinary, wild, unexpected bubbling up inside you that you just... I don't usually drop this on people necessarily. I'm still working on what I can tell people right away and what I just like, yeah. But what you can know is this, that from out here, from a place of fragility and low resilience, it feels a lot like struggle. And it moves into ease. And from out here, for some reason, we experience a lot of drama. And that moves into peace. We don't need it as much as we needed it out here. It helps us feel in control, right? And it helps us feel good in a lot of ways. And just to say it, you might also notice that what you need to do and to make yourself feel better in terms of spending money, numbing, shopping, it's expensive to live out here. And there's a lot of health byproducts. It affects your health, it's affecting your relationships. And then you have to spend a whole bunch of energy to fix what you've been doing to help. It's very sad. It's not efficient, right? This is elegance in here, right? And you need less, you want less, you love more, because you have the space for it that you just weren't giving yourself before. And there is nothing wrong about being out here. And it's not even like an easy spiral. Like, it's probably more of a jagged experience going in and out. And I have plenty of stories of myself like diving headfirst into a shallow pond with my own personal solutions, right? A lot of which for many years showed up as, I think I need to leave the country. That'll solve everything. This is a pattern that shows up in nature again and again and again. This is what webs look like. This is what dendrites look like. This is what a human brain looks like. This is what fungi look like, right? It's teaching us. The whole world is teaching us all of the time. Yeah.
Is that a mic drop?
That was a mic drop.
Damn.
I'm going to read you this last thing, because I just wrote it And I want to give it to you. Okay. In some ways, when I wrote this, this became this. I called it Birth Announcement, Not Lambs, because I just finished lambing season. People are used to getting announcements to me like, there's another lamb. During the year of a pandemic, in quarantine, in illness, in isolation, in loss, in caregiving, along with all that came migrant visitors too. Silence, solitude, and stillness. When a choked garden bed is cleared, smothered seeds volunteer, germinate, and rise. Many seeds are rising in the world. I've been engaging in gardening for resilience in myself and in you and in the world for so many years, but often I've circled back around to the basics, the soil health, if you will, that opens the possibilities of wild and voluptuously sustainable growth in what it is to live a vibrant human life. I have loved it all, but I've also felt the pull to take a group on a deeper dive, beyond the safer and more understood landscapes of the self, and into the extraordinary and spectacular wilderness of the mind and the heart. As humans, we need the gifts of the wilderness. So now I'm leading a new venture, guiding a small group into the resilience backcountry, building deeper skills, learning new terrains, taking risks, mapping blind spots, meeting change on its own turf, and then returning back home, safe but now changed, and bringing a new self to the needs of our loves, our communities, and our world, and sooner rather than later. This is always the invitation. To see truly what the stakes are, to examine where you are looking for the solutions, to ask where you want to align yourself and with whom you want to be traveling. This particular vessel can include solo voyaging, but also not. And it actively exercises mind and body and heart and nervous system and spirit, because that's what we have. What we acquire in the backcountry might include some of the many forms of resilience or of leadership, or that clear light of self that is peace of spirit. And as in every wilderness, we learn what we have gained while we are on the trail or once we have returned back home. And the last part was a poem, so that's how I wrote it. Risk for life. Our interior is not a building designed and framed, not a field measured and plowed, not a machine crafted for storage and prediction. Up and out into the clearer air, still inside us, we meet all that lives blithely outside control, that has always been there, just waiting. Just waiting to be met, seen, dared, waiting to richly amaze us, re-entwine and reshape us. We are not too late, but we are none too early. At the end of the trail, above the broad meadow, we have never seen a tree of such magnificence, supporting so much life.